this dilemma of Jesus' identity. We see it so clearly in verse 16, where right after, the guy had just been brought to the Pharisees, and some of the Pharisees said, this man Jesus is not from God. Do you see that in verse 16? This man Jesus is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But other Pharisees asked, well, how can a sinner perform a sign like this? And they were in the dilemma. It was their external rules of keeping the law of Moses versus Almighty God. The Pharisees came, this is the ultimate between a rock and a hard place. And because of their unwillingness to yield to God, unwillingness to yield and to be humble of heart, this rock and hard place continued throughout this story. Their blindness, when Jesus said, you're still blind, this is it. What they thought was, when it comes to the blind man, how they understood it was his blindness was evidence of sin, either his sin or his parents' sin. And now that he had been healed, that was a sign of holiness, right? Which makes sense, like someone holy and close to God did this miracle. And yet, Jesus didn't keep the Sabbath. He actually healed on the Sabbath. And so Jesus could not be a holy man because he had broke the Sabbath. And I want to be clear here. The one who creates this dilemma of his own identity was Jesus. It was not a dilemma for him. Jesus was in no troubling spot. But this dilemma is what would set the stage for his ultimate death on the cross for us. And these Pharisees would be the ones who would bring it. He understood them. He understood, too, the heavy loads that the Pharisees put on people and the rules that they created to manage behavior. Although, like he said, Matthew 23, last week we referenced that, where the insides were full of dead man's bones. You wash the outside of the cup, but the inside's all grody, right? He understood this about them. And so it's Jesus who intentionally heals on the Sabbath to create this dilemma. We've seen it earlier in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 5 is where Jesus heals the lame man, right? Remember when he said, get up, take your mat, and walk. Guess what day of the week that was? It was the Sabbath. It's like, Jesus, there's 6 other days you could have healed that guy. Why did you heal on the Sabbath? Jesus is doing this intentionally and on purpose. Now, don't misunderstand. Jesus knew all about the Sabbath. Everything that was created by him and for him. He understands Sabbath, and he kept the Sabbath perfectly. But he healed because, freedom and healing, what better thing to deliver than on a Sabbath day where true rest could come to this person's soul. And yet even in John 5, so very early on, we see the dilemma in the Pharisees. It says in John 5:16, so because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason they tried, this is John 5:18, for this reason they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And if a human being called God his Father, making himself, that deserved to be stoned, that person, because it was heresy, it was wrong. So the Pharisees, right, are in this dilemma where Jesus is doing miraculous things that only someone from God can do, and yet he's breaking their rules that they've written on the side. See, the law of Moses said, keep the Sabbath. Understand the Sabbath, keep it holy. And what the Pharisees and the religious leaders had done is they'd written pages and pages of rules on how to keep the Sabbath. All those man-made external rules, Jesus is like using that to leverage against the Pharisees. They're in this dilemma. Instead of celebrating the miracle that Jesus did, because of their blindness, right, they're getting even more frustrated, more desperate.